Welcome to Friday with Friends, the Friday episode of Unperfect, where I get to pick the brains of some amazing new and old friends here on the Unperfect podcast. Today, I get to hang out with the wise, faith-filled, and fun Sandy Cooper. Sandy is an award-winning author of 3 books, a podcaster, and a professionally certified home chef. Yummy! She has been helping frazzled moms find peace since 2008 at thescooponbalance.com. And she's the co-founder of Writing Off Social, where she helps female Christian writers grow their audience without social media. She podcasts weekly at The Balance Momcast and Writing Off Social, the podcast, from her home office in Florida, where she lives with her family. And I have been a recipient of all of the wonderful stuff she has shared on both of these podcasts. So I'm really excited that here today in episode number 61, we get to hear her story on what led her to leave social media and some insights and practical strategies for us, no matter where we fall in our journeys with social media, whether it's a love relationship, a hate, or a little bit of both. You're going to be able to take away something today. So listen in. Sandy Cooper, welcome to the Unperfect podcast.
Woohoo! I'm so glad to be here. Thank you for having me back. It's good to see your pretty face.
Same. And I was thinking the last time you were here, we talked about busyness. And I know you've been pretty busy with life since the last time we've talked, which we'll talk about some of that later. But I know with your 2 podcasts and the course you're teaching and all the things you're doing, your time is very valuable. So thank you for taking it to be on here with us.
Well, I love it. Well, if I recall correctly, basically the invitation said, I'm either going to share all of your information myself, or you can come on and share it yourself. And so I thought, well, I can come on and talk about it, but either way, like it would have been like I was here. So
That's right. There you go. I was using you no matter what.
That's right.
Yeah, that is exactly what I said, because I was getting all my information from it, and I thought, why not just go to the pro over there?
That was funny. I think that was like one of the best invitations I've ever gotten. It was almost like a challenge. It was like a challenge. I was going to say a threat, but I didn't feel threatened. It was more like a challenge. It was like,
either you're going to get misquoted for 25
That's
minutes,
right. Or show up and speak for yourself.
Exactly. Yes.
That's
not how I do all my invites, but maybe I should
yeah,
consider that.
You might want to incorporate that strategy.
Powerful, yeah.
Okay.
All right. So, Sandy, what we're going to talk about today is actually what you were talking about the first time I ever heard your name or your voice, which I found interesting as I was thinking about this. It was an episode of yours that someone else was reposting in October of 2022, I believe, entitled, What Would You Do with 2 Hours a Day? And at the time, it had never occurred to me to even be off social media. I didn't know that was a thing. I didn't know people did that. So the whole idea of even challenging the norm of being in social media was quite new to me, which I know it's getting a little more traction these days. But I was intrigued because I knew how ADD I was and still am. And so that I was just like, whoa. And it really made me start paying attention to how much time I was on there, the rabbit trails I would go down every time I got on social media. And I do just want to say up front before we start, and I think you feel the same way, we are not here to judge anyone using social media. Like I was just trying it again until last week, right? I've done the on and off thing. I kind of followed your story. And I may change directions in the future. I'm off for now, but I just I wanted to give a place for us to offer our stories and your extensive research, which you've done, and just things that you've learned, so that people have a more accurate lens through which to make those decisions for themselves, for their families, whatever. So I just want to throw that out there. We're not going to be bashing everyone that's on social media. So,
sure. No, absolutely.
Yeah. So just tell us a little bit about your story with social media, your exit from it, why you headed in that direction in the first place.
Yeah. So I joined my first social media account in 2008, which was also the same year that I started my first blog, which was also when we adopted my youngest daughter, and she was 1. So I did all of that at the same time. And at the time, there was a reason behind it, is because I had been teaching and leading Bible studies in my church or doing it in my home And when my youngest daughter came to live with us, she, a 1-year-old from another country was just a whole
Sure.
thing. And I had an 8-year-old and a 6-year-old, and it was just a lot, and I couldn't get it together. And so it was a really great way for me at the beginning to share my writing, to teach still, and to stay connected with people, quite frankly, because I am more tend towards introvert. It in When I was already feeling overwhelmed with parenting, and a child who would only sleep on me, um, and I had all these other kids to take care of, it was just impossible for me to get out and see people. So it was very isolating. And at the time, social media, Facebook was great. And so once I realized like the whole world was on Facebook, I looked for every single person I had ever
Yes.
known. I like from my earliest childhood friend to like the person that I just met at church in the foyer. I would immediately go home and be like, "Oh, is she on Facebook? Oh, is he on Facebook?" And I reconnected with everyone, Shelly. Like it was amazing. And it was so fun. Like I was
Right.
having a blast. It was, it was really fun back then. And from a writing perspective, it was just a really easy way to share my work. I could write a blog post, I could post it on Facebook, people would share it, people would read it. It was great. And so that's how it was for me in the early days. And then I was actively, I'm a writer, and so I was actively seeking publication, and so it wasn't long before publishers and literary agents started recognizing that, hey, this is a really great way for an author to build her platform. That was a new term back then. It wasn't something that we really talked about like in that way. And Michael Hyatt made it popular with his book platform. And so I started, being more intentional with trying to build my author platform there, but also very, integrated into my life. And it really hit a crescendo for me around 2016. I just remembered that time frame because by this time now, my kids were, well, they were 8 years older. So they were 16, 14, and 9. And my two older ones were old enough to have their own social media accounts. So I was like monitoring that whole circus. I was trying to build my author platform. I was trying to keep up with literally every person I had ever known my whole life. And every person, and I don't know if this is still true because I've been off for a little while, but every group and club and school activity that anyone was involved in had a corresponding Facebook group where they shared vital information. So if you were not part of the Facebook group, you could not get information, which was super important when you've got three kids, in three different schools going. I had a high school, middle school, elementary, and everybody's got things, and I have things. And then I was actually paying real cash money for paid groups.
Right.
And so I am like, my roots were so deep by 2016. And I had, as new platforms would open up, I would join. So I wasn't like super quick to join. I wasn't one of those people like, ooh, shiny new thing.
Right.
But I'd be like, oh, okay, people are really doing well on Instagram. I should try that. And oh, Twitter seems to be a really great place for writers in particular. So I probably should open a Twitter account and start interacting on there. And oh, Pinterest seems to be a great place to share, blog posts here and that, So I just kept adding accounts and trying to be present everywhere and trying to find the place where it worked best. And I started noticing, and I thought it was just me, just a real connection between um, the amount of time I was spending on these platforms, which was probably 4 to 6 hours a day, if I'm being honest, because I'm doing it in the cracks of everything. Uh, and and my levels of anxiety. So for me, it was just the anxiety thing of just feeling like always glitchy and always like, everything was on my phone. I'm constantly responding to people. And again, it's not all professional or personal. It's like both, and it's all integrated, and I can't separate it. And and there were many times during that period that I'm filling up journals of prayers to God and like pro and con lists of, is there a way for me to make this smaller in my life? Is there a way for me to maybe not use it professionally anymore, but only personally? What if I only use it personally, but not professionally? And there, no matter how I tried to figure out how to disengage, I couldn't. Like I thought this is so, it would be like trying to figure out how to rip out my heart and still live.
Right.
You know what I mean? It felt that vital to me, which feels silly to me now, but at the time it was very real. And so so I just kept going. And then it really the crashing point for me was in 2019. I attended a writers conference, and there were numbers that number of audience followers that writers are given by literary agents and publishers if they think you're viable to work with, and they want you to have a certain number of people who follow you. And back in 2009 and 2010, they told me about 5,000. Like, if you can just have like 5,000 blog followers, then that's, come back and talk to us. In fact, it was Moody Publishers who told me that. And they're a big publisher. And I was like, okay, that sounds great. And so I worked to get my 5,000. And I went back to another writers conference in 2019 with a book. I had self-published my first book. I had this second book I was going to write. And I went to this writers conference, and they were telling me now that the target has moved, and now it's 50,000 to 100,000. And I was like, honestly, I felt like someone punched me in the gut. Sure. I thought, what? Like, how? I mean, I knew it was no longer 5, but I thought maybe 10. Sure. Like, can you work with me? Like, I'm on a trajectory to growth. Like what are you? And so I left there so disillusioned, like completely disillusioned. And I won't go into the whole like moment when I just actually walked over to my computer and said, I've got to step away from this. But I'll just say, I was listening to a podcast. Someone said something on a podcast that just felt like a direct answer to prayer, that just basically said, get off social media, go write your book. And I was like, you know what? Amen. I'm going to get off social media. I'm going to go write my book. I'm going to take a break. I'm going to take a 1-year break. So on September 19th, 2019, September 11th, 2019, I walked over to my computer. I wrote an exit post to my followers on Facebook and all my social media accounts, put something in the writers group that I was paying to be a member of, and I posted something to my blog, and I put it on my podcast. I had just started my podcast a few months prior to that. And so I just thought, I'm gonna, and I didn't do it to make a deal of it. I just wanted everyone to know where to find me. And exactly. Right, exactly. So I put it out there, and I walked away, and I wrote my second book. And unbeknownst to me, there was a pandemic that was about to happen. So all of that happened during that year. And unbeknownst to me also, my husband got another job. We lived in Kentucky at the time. He got a job in Jacksonville, Florida. And we had to move during that year across the country. And so my year was full of life. Like it was very full. And I wrote my book, we moved. And a year later, I wasn't quite ready to come back, because honestly, September of 2020 was right before the 2020 elections. Yes. And if you recall the dumpster fire that was. And so I thought, I'm going to wait until that blows over, and then I'm going to come back. And I was actually kind of excited to come back, because I missed seeing what everyone was up to. There were people, because of the pandemic, who didn't know we moved. Right. I was like, I probably wanted to connect with them, because I didn't know how else to reach them. And I was excited to tell everybody about my book. And, I wanted to lead an online Bible study, and I wanted to have a book launch, and the whole thing. And so I came back, and I was excited. I was going to set new boundaries around it. I was going to make this work. I was going to, whatever. I had all the things I was going to do. And I dove all in, and I was doing it. Like the first month was okay, and then the second month I'm like, and by the third month I was like, dear Lord, I hate it here. Like it's still everything just felt exactly the same, but worse, because everybody kind of lost their mind. Right. In that year. Right. Between the pandemic and the 2020 elections, everyone went crazy. Yep. And I came back to that and I was like, wow. And so I came to God and I said, can I leave? Like,
Mm,
I just want to be done. I don't want to do this anymore. But I didn't, as a writer, I didn't know. I felt trapped.
yeah,
As a writer, I felt trapped. As a mom with kids social media age,
sure.
I felt trapped. As a human being whose entire life seemed to have been connected in some way, shape, or form to a group on social media, I felt trapped. And I was just like, God, we have to, can we find another way? And I like to say it wasn't a big thus saith the Lord moment where the Lord was like, get thee off of
Right.
social media. Like, it wasn't like that, but it was a sense of peace. And I just felt God say, yes, like, you can leave and we'll figure this
Yep.
out. Like, we will figure this out. And so on March 21st, 2021, I left for good.
Wow. So
Yeah.
much of what you said resonates with me, and my story is very different. I'm usually the last to join a trend. Like, I remember when cell
Mm-hmm.
phones came out, I was like, this is so stupid. I cannot believe y'all think you have to have a phone with you all the time. I will never have a cell phone.
That's right.
Seriously, I've been spending the last
For sure.
52 years saying I will never, and here I am. But
Yeah. And here we
here we
are
are.
yet again.
But
That's right.
it was getting close to my 20th high school reunion, and I wasn't getting any emails, or no one was talking about it. I was like, how are we not having? I had a big class, but we were close, and so I was like, how
Mm-hmm.
are we not doing this? And finally, I talked to a friend, and she said, oh, it's all over Facebook. Facebook? What is this thing of which you
Yeah.
speak? So
That's right.
so that's when I got on, and it was for I didn't start writing until the last couple of years. So for me, it was always for the social and keeping up with people, and for me it was the time I get on maybe just to check something on Facebook Marketplace, like I'm looking for
Yeah.
something, and two
Sure.
hours later, I've bought a bathing suit and I have watched hundreds of videos of puppy dogs. I mean, like I don't even know what happened. It's
Of
crazy.
course. Yes.
So yeah, so I can relate to a lot of the just the good reasons why you want to get on there and you want to connect with people and you want to look up people you
Sure.
haven't seen. I mean, that is kind of cool that
It
we're in a
is.
generation where our grandparents wouldn't have imagined ever seeing a person from their elementary school class again, and now I was on
That's
Facebook with
right.
a friend from elementary school. Like, I don't know,
That's
just
right.
that was
It is
interesting.
cool.
Yeah,
And those are the good things. And that's one of the many things that makes it so difficult for people to weigh out whether or not they even should live without it,
yeah, exactly.
because it's not a cut and dry
Right.
situation.
And that speaks to a lot of the statistics you have uncovered about the time suck that is social media.
Yeah.
Can you talk about some of that with what you've discovered, or if you even want to talk about some of the research that why it is such a time suck for us that you've discovered?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So when I was trying to decide if I should leave social media, it was I again, I thought I was the problem. Like, I was the one who couldn't handle it. I was the one who I didn't talk to a lot of people about this. Like, it wasn't like I was always talking about, like, oh God, social media is the worst.
Right.
But I struggled because I was in a world where everyone else seemed to be handling it fine.
Right.
And so when I left, and I'll just say this really quick, why I even did research, because I wasn't researching these things before I left. I wasn't trying to figure it out. But after I left, it was like a year later, and I had written now my third book, because when you're off social media, guess what? You get
Give
some time
right.
back. And so I had written now my third book. I was, and I had gone around on a podcast tour promoting that book. And when every single time I would be on a guest on another podcast, someone inevitably would, like, either on the podcast or after the podcast, because it's customary, like, well, how can people find you? And I'd say, well, I'm not on social media anymore, but I have my podcast, I have my website, blah blah blah. And they'd be like, what do you mean you're not on social media?
Right.
And so it became this thing, and I thought, do people even care? Like, why do people even care? Well, then I hired a business coach after the launch of that book to just kind of help me, like, streamline my work and take me, to the next level, whatever that meant. And I, he's looking through all my stuff, and he said, one of the most interesting things you're talking about is leaving social media. And I'm like, I'm not talking about it. and really? And he was like, oh yeah, you should really talk to moms about getting off social media. And I'm like, I don't know if I want to talk to moms. I'm like, I don't know why people should get off social
Right.
media. I just know why I got off social
Exactly.
media. And so I thought, well, if I'm going to do this, then I better the heck figure out
Right.
why people should get off social media. And so I did a deep dive that summer,
Mm-hmm.
the summer of 2022, and I just binged like 11 books, 100 podcasts. I don't even know. I was like listening to things at 3 times speed and reading like a crazy woman, trying to understand the impact of social media on women, on society, on our kids. Like I was like, oh my gosh, like, oh wait, that anxiety connection thing is not just Sandy not being able to handle it. The fact, like what you had just described, that rabbit hole situation is not just Shelly not being able to handle
Right.
it. All of the things that I thought were only true for me and anecdotal turn out that, like, oh no, this is a global issue.
Right.
And there are legitimate reasons why we all feel trapped and addicted, and because it's designed to be that way. So back to your question about the time suck. So depending on what statistic you're looking at, the average person in the United States spends at least 2 hours a day on social media. And that's just the average person. So for a person like me who is on social media as just a consumer, that's one aspect. But I was also on as a creator.
Right.
And so for me, it was much more than that. I mean, the least amount that I could do was 2 hours a day. I mean, for me, during much of that time was 4 to 6 hours a day. And so what I learned is that, much like the way I was using it, is that people they're just checking it constantly. Like it is the thing where you are you're stirring pasta and you're on your phone. You're stop at a red light, you're checking
Right.
your social media. You're of course all the places where you would normally wait, like carpool or a doctor's office, or your coffee to percolate. Does coffee still percolate?
Mine doesn't.
That's an old thing. No, coffee brew.
Yes.
Yeah, it made me sound like I was 75 years old when I
Right.
said percolate. Yeah. So the just the fact that we were averaging 2 hours a day, 2+ hours a day on social media. So I did this thing. So I did this very crude math when I discovered that statistic. And I figured, okay, if I joined Facebook in 2008, and over the course of these years, I've spent 2 hours a day on social media, which I knew for a fact there were many, many times that there was more, way more, way,
Right.
way, way more than that. But even if I just used 2 hours a day, I figured out that I had spent a year and 3 months of my life, 24 hours a day,
Wow.
7 days a week, on social media. And so, as a Christian who understands that time is a gift and it's finite, it's not this thing that we can squander. It's not. I mean, obviously, we're eternal beings, so we do. But time on this earth has a beginning and an end, and the scripture that became like my guiding scripture during that time was Psalm 90:12. Teach us to number our days aright, so that we would gain a heart of wisdom. And that's Moses basically saying earlier in that psalm, like, we have about 70 years, and most of them are struggle. And so, Lord, teach us to number our days aright. And he's not saying, Lord, give me the wisdom to number my days aright. He's saying, teach us to number our days aright so that we may gain a heart of wisdom. Because how you spend your days is who you are becoming.
Right.
And so if you are not numbering your days aright, you can become something very unwise. And if you are immersing yourself in social media, and again, all of the people listening probably follow super life-giving accounts. I did,
Right.
and I hope that I was also a person who contributed to people's wisdom
Right.
when I was posting on social media, and not someone who was posting foolishness. But still, that 2 hours a day, a year, and 4 months over the course of whatever it was, 16 years that I was on social media. I can't do math. So
I don't either.
see, yeah, we might have to have someone
I'm
fact
married
check
to
my
a
math. But
mathematician, so that's real fun.
yeah, me too. Yeah, I know. So 2 hours a day is what most of us are doing. That was the answer. Very long answer to your question.
Yeah. When you think about the hours, like we were just joking at the beginning of how we'd rather have a text than a phone call, right? I'm not going
Right.
to I'm not going to just go up to a random stranger and talk for 2 hours. Like I have so much to do in any given day
That's right.
that
That's right.
that's precious. But there's something about, and hopefully you'll tell us a little bit about this, the algorithms and the way it's designed to suck me in.
Sure.
And I will go off on I will suddenly be in the presence of people I don't know for 2 hours, because it's not just
That's right.
people I know. They're quoting other
Hmm.
people. They're talking about things I don't know if they're an expert in, but since I don't know, then
That's right.
maybe they are. So like it's 2 hours of almost unprotected information that's coming into my brain. Like you said,
That's right.
there's the positive and godly things that are on there too, and I do love those. I do love seeing
Hmm.
new things, and that is one way you can see that kind of content. But
But
yeah,
it's not the only way you can see that kind of
exactly,
content. So
exactly,
I just want to stick that in there, because for someone who might have heard that and be like, "Oh yeah, that is how I follow Beth Moore." Well,
right,
you know what? You can follow her other ways.
right.
So you can consume her content using Beth Moore as the euphemism for good and godly content that I might like to
There you
follow.
go.
It's like there are other ways, and we can talk about
Yeah,
that later.
yeah,
But yes, I just
absolutely,
wanted to throw that in
absolutely.
there. Yeah.
There are ways that can be your focus, and you can stay
Mhm.
there instead of
Right.
having to consume all the other things. It's like if I want to go to a restaurant and I just want to eat this one thing, but
Mhm.
they're going to put 8 other things on my plate. That doesn't ever
That's
happen.
right.
That's a terrible analogy, but you know what I'm saying? Like I just want one thing, but I have to eat.
I want to go to that
Yeah,
restaurant.
we're gonna open it.
Yum.
It's called the One Thing
That's right.
Restaurant. Yeah, but you know what I'm saying.
Yes.
Yeah, and we will. I'm glad you mentioned that, because we do need to mention some of the other spaces, and that's one of the things that's I'm going to mention later in one of the other questions I'm going to ask you. But I did want to, before we kind of jump into some statistics or things that the way it works. Um,
Yeah.
you did a survey of a lot of women,
Mhm.
and plus you've been
Mhm.
talking about this for a couple of years now, so you've talked
Yeah.
with a lot of women. And
Yes.
a lot of reasons people don't want to get off social media is fear, which is
That's right.
interesting, because I've just finished a podcast series teaching about fear and how God doesn't want us to deal with that. That is something He
Mhm.
tells us over and over in Scripture, that we don't have to fear. So maybe touch on what some of those fears are, and then maybe a few practical things that we can do to lessen those fears related to possibly leaving social media.
Sure. So what I did is, when that business coach suggested that I become the mom who gets moms off social media, which I
What a
just didn't
title.
want to do that.
I know.
I know. I'm like, okay, whatever. But I thought, I want the people that I talk to in the Balanced Momcast and the Scoop on Balance, the people I've been writing to for well over 15 years at this point. Um, they are overwhelmed Christian moms with kids still in the home. Okay. So I thought, okay, I wonder how the people who are following me, who I've just sort of made announcements like I'm leaving,
Right.
I wonder how they feel about social media. And so I sent a survey to them, and I had 131 people fill out the survey. And so these were all moms. And I asked the question, like, what are your fears about leaving social media? Because I wanted to understand, do you have fears? I mean, I asked a lot of other questions, but that was one of the questions. And I allowed them to check anything that applied. So some of the math won't line up if you
Right.
like were to look at all the answers, because they could name as many as they were scared of. But the main one, so 61% said that they were afraid
Mm-hmm.
to lose touch with friends and family, which I totally understood. 35% said that
Mm.
they were afraid that they won't get information from groups or clubs, as I stated, and 31% that they said that they were afraid that they wouldn't get information from their child's school, their child's sports, or their child's clubs. So those were the three biggest ones. And then, of course, people said things like,
Right.
I don't want to not have Facebook Marketplace, like things like that, and but the big ones were, I don't want to lose touch with friends or family, and I don't want to not know what's
Right.
going on in these vital things that are a part of my life. And so as I was, those were my fears as well. I just want to say, like, those were legitimate fears, totally understood that. And so here's what I would suggest, and this is what I did. First of all,
Sure.
I think it's really important that we name what we're afraid of. Like, I think we have to identify it. I think because there might just be this overwhelming, looming fear, like this ominous fear about, like, I can't. If you don't really know what you're
Sure.
afraid of, you can't address it. Like, there is definitely a spirit of fear, but
Right.
these are legitimate fears. This isn't like Satan coming and being like, "Ugh." This is like, no, really, how are you going to keep up with your friends and family? So, like, it's legitimate. So what I did is, and I would suggest, is to make a list of the
Mm-hmm.
people that you are afraid to lose touch with. Because if and I'll just say this, I got off of social media in stages. I did not flip the switch. So, for example, when I took that 1 year off, I did not deactivate my accounts. I kept them active. And once a week, I went in and I I was in the writing group that I was paying a monthly fee for. I would check in my writing group to just see what was going on in my writing group. And I was checking my
Sure.
kids' school Facebook page because it was the only way at that point that I could keep in touch. Okay, so, but I still had an active account, wasn't posting anything, wasn't scrolling. When I left in 2021, again, I did not shut everything down. One of the things that I did is I went through, and this was a painstaking process. It took me a couple weeks, but I went to my Facebook page, that conglomeration of everyone from, childhood neighbor to person who I friended who reads my blog in 2019. You know what I mean? Like this span of people. And I went to every single, there were thousands of people. And I went to every profile
Mm-hmm.
and I looked at them and I said, do I know you? If so, how do I know you? And do I want to stay in touch with you? And if the answer was yes, I wrote their name down on a piece of paper.
Yeah.
And I mean, it took me weeks it
Sure.
was such a good, because you know what? Those are people. Those are people. And then I looked, and when I got to my original, if I didn't want to stay in touch with them, I immediately unfriended them. And I just thought, I'm done. It's fine. You know
Right.
what? We reconnected. It was great that you sat behind me in 10th grade biology. It was nice catching up, and now I'm done.
Right.
It's fine. And so once I did that, I realized that there were only a few people. Like, my plan was to just keep like a small private Facebook account and maybe have like 200 people,
Right.
which was small and private to me at that point.
Right.
When I
Considering
got down to
thousands. Yeah.
exactly, when I got down to it, Shelly, I realized there were only like 25 people maybe that
Wow.
I wanted
Yeah.
to stay in contact with. And then I started thinking, okay, wait, how else can I stay in touch with you? Okay, all the people that I knew in real life, I already had their phone number. And I was
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, duh. Like, I can text them. Like, I can call them. That's fine. People that I was following, like, the elusive Beth Moore, our euphemism
Right.
for all the life giving accounts, those kind of people, I was like, oh, wait, does she have a newsletter? Does she have a podcast I can listen to? Does she have a website? Like, what is there another way that does she have a book? Like, can I just read her material? Do I have to like listen to her every incessant thought? Like, no, probably not. Like, I can just follow her another way. Um, News was a huge thing.
Right.
How am I going to get my news? How am I also going to find out when other things are going on? Like if there's someone in, say, my high school graduating class that passes away, how will I find out? Because now I'm not in that group of, graduating class of 1986. Now I have to. So, those are all really important things. So with things like that, and this is normally what I would say last, but I think it's a really important thing, is there are enough people that will stay on social media on your behalf. I encourage people to assign an ambassador, a Facebook ambassador, and
That's
they,
a great idea. Yeah.
and so they'll just let you know. Like, trust me, everyone, you're going to have this fear that you're not going to know anything, and shockingly, you're going to know everything you need to know.
Well, friends, Sandy was just getting to some really practical ideas, but it's going to be continued in part 2. So you'll have to listen in to episode number 63 to get the rest of this interview. But I just want to leave you with some questions that I want you to be thinking about before you hear part 2. And they're all based on things that Sandy shared with us today. But just think about what your answers would be to the following 5 questions. Number 1, what would you do if you had 2 extra hours in your day? How would you spend it? Number 2, are you experiencing any anxiety in your life? Number 3, do you feel trapped? Like, I'd love to leave social media or take a break, but I'm depending on it for information or connection. Do you feel trapped there? Number 4, is there something you've wanted to do or God's been laying on your heart and you just don't think you have time? And number 5, straight from what Sandy was talking about there at the end, can you name your fears related to taking a break from social media or leaving for good? So I just love you to think about those 5 things. What would you do if you had 2 extra hours in your day? Are you experiencing anxiety in your life? Do you feel trapped in social media? Is there something God's been laying on your heart to do, but you just don't think you have time? And what are the fears you have related to leaving or taking a break from social media? Because she's going to give some amazing, amazing ideas and strategies and principles and truths next week that I don't want you to miss in episode number 63. So make sure you tune in. I'm also going to put links to Sandy's website and podcast in the show notes, especially if you're a mom who feels a little frazzled. That would be me. She has so many episodes on the Balanced Momcast. When you go find it, it's going to be like Christmas. You've got all these episodes you can binge. So if you're also a writer or a podcaster, she and her ministry partner, Mary Kay Taylor, are making huge waves in this industry with their ideas and their concepts about how to truly build your platform and write off of social media. So head over there to the links to Writing Off Social. I'll put also in the show notes. There's so much great information and resources there for you that you'll want to take advantage of. As always, I am praying that you are able to see glimpses of God's glory in the now and the not yet of your unperfect life this week. See you next time.